It began on a dusty Saturday afternoon, the kind that seemed built for boredom. Sheldon had run out of books to read, physics papers to annotate, and even the smell of freshly baked cornbread from the kitchen wasn't enough to distract him. Boredom for most children meant cartoons, but for Sheldon Cooper, it meant only one thing: exploration. Mary had asked George to clean out the attic for months, but as usual, he never did. So when Sheldon asked, "Can I go organize the upper-level crawl space?" Mary absent-mindedly replied, "Sure, honey, just don't fall through the ceiling." Sheldon climbed the narrow fold-down ladder into the attic, expecting cobwebs and discarded furniture. But what he found instead would change everything. In the farthest corner of the attic, behind a box labeled Christmas, 1985, Sheldon noticed a metallic briefcase. It didn't belong. It wasn't dusty like the rest. It was locked, but the lock was old, a simple latch system. Sheldon used a screwdriver to pop it open. Inside were a dozen VHS tapes, each labeled with only a date. No names, no context. The oldest read, April 17, 1979. The most recent, March 3, 1988. One of them was marked simply, "Do not play." Sheldon's curiosity, once the cause of minor classroom disruptions, now led him down a far more dangerous path. He carried the tapes to the living room and popped the first one into the family VCR, while no one was home. The screen crackled to life. The footage was grainy, but the audio was sharp. A man's voice, clearly George Sr.'s, was speaking. Confession log, week 17. Subject's reaction remains unpredictable. He spoke of numbers in his dreams again. "We're running out of time. I don't know if he's even mine." Sheldon froze. He rewound. Played again. He spoke of numbers in his dreams. Another tape. Another confession. Missy responds to normal stimuli. Georgie too. But Sheldon, he talks in codes. He wakes up shouting equations. "I record them. I have to. I don't know if this is God's test or a government mistake." Sheldon's hands trembled. The room felt colder. He jumped as the front door opened. Mary, George, and Missy were back from church. He turned off the TV, shoved the tape back into the case, and bolted up to his room. That night he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, heart pounding. What was Dad talking about? What did he mean? "He's not mine." The next morning, Sheldon skipped breakfast. He snuck out to visit Pastor Jeff under the pretense of a theological inquiry. In truth, he asked about confession tapes, surveillance, and genetic sin. Pastor Jeff, confused and worried, called Mary. Back at home, Mary confronted Sheldon. "Why are you asking those things?" Sheldon said nothing. He just stared at her. "Did Daddy ever think I wasn't his?" Mary's eyes went wide. "Where did you hear that?" Sheldon lied. "A dream." But that night, Mary and George had a heated conversation in the kitchen. Sheldon recorded it through the vent with a tape recorder. Mary whispered, "I told you to burn those tapes. You promised me." George grunted. "I thought I did. But you know how that attic is." Mary's voice cracked. "If he finds out what really happened at the hospital that night." She didn't finish. Sheldon didn't sleep. The next day, all the tapes were gone from the attic. But Sheldon had copied one. And it contained something else. A voice that wasn't George's. Subject S. 13 shows exceptional cognitive development. Enhanced encoding speed. Recommend observation continues under civilian guardianship. Then a sound, a knock. A mechanical door closing. And one final whisper. He must never know. The day after the tapes disappeared from the attic, Sheldon Cooper began constructing what he would later call his personal intelligence archive. A coded journal of everything he could remember from the audio he heard. He didn't trust paper. He didn't trust memory. So he encrypted everything into a sequence of prime-based binary, stored across hidden floppy disks, labeled as classical music archives. No one could decode them, except him. But what truly haunted Sheldon wasn't the mystery itself. It was the realization that his family had been part of it. For the first time in his life, Sheldon didn't feel safe in his own home. At dinner, he watched Mary with narrow eyes, listening for any cracks in her voice. He studied George's body language like a scientist observing a wild specimen. And when Missy asked, "Why are you staring at us like we're aliens?" Sheldon replied without blinking, "Because one of you might be lying." That night, Sheldon placed the copied tape in a new hiding place, inside the hollowed-out battery compartment of an old toy train he no longer played with. But someone else had already been watching. At 2:13 a.m., a light flickered across his room. He woke up to see a silhouette standing in the hallway. At first he thought it was Georgie trying to prank him, but the figure was too tall, too still. It vanished before he could speak. The next morning he discovered a note on his desk. It was typed, not handwritten. S13, discontinue pursuit. Archive terminated. You are not cleared for phase 2. He showed the note to Pastor Jeff. Pastor Jeff panicked and told him to destroy it. Sometimes, Jeff stammered, God doesn't want us digging, Sheldon. Sheldon didn't listen. He scanned the note and ran a digital analysis. The font matched a classified memo style used in old military documents from the 1980s. But Sheldon had more pressing questions. What was S13? And why was he called that? He cornered George Sr. after school and for once, asked a question not to know, but to test. Did I ever have a different name before Sheldon? George froze. His face didn't move, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. Why would you ask that? Just a hypothesis, Sheldon answered. That night, George left the house, told Mary he was going to the store. But he drove out to a remote trailer by Lake Granby. Sheldon followed him quietly, on his bicycle, keeping his distance. George entered the trailer. A light came on. Sheldon watched through a crack in the window. Inside was a man in uniform, not military but more private. Their voices were muffled, but Sheldon recorded what he could. The boy's digging too deep, George said. Then shut it down, the man replied. We told you no more memories past age 3. If he remembers what happened at the lab. He was just a baby, George snapped. He couldn't understand what he saw. He didn't understand. But he remembered. He's just a kid, George repeated. He's my kid. The man stood up. No, George. He never was. Sheldon stumbled back from the window. He didn't cry. He didn't run. He just quietly turned around and biked home under the stars, repeating equations in his head to stay calm. Back at home, Sheldon reviewed the one tape he managed to duplicate in full. Frame by frame, audio by audio, he isolated background noises. In one clip, he detected a faint voice saying coordinates, latitude and longitude. When entered into a map, it led to a location just outside Lubbock, Texas. A decommissioned research facility now labeled Property of MedTech Agri-Science. But there were no crops, no staff, no records. Sheldon dug through public archives and found one grainy photo of the facility from 1989. Standing at the gate, his mother, Mary Cooper, staring into the lens. He confronted her. This time he didn't ask politely. Why were you at a secret research site while pregnant with me? Mary's hand trembled. That was a long time ago, Sheldon. I didn't know what they were doing. But you consented to it. They told us it was genetic therapy, to make sure you'd be healthy. But it was more than that, wasn't it? Mary sat down. They said your brain would grow faster, that you'd see the world in a way no one else could. We thought it was a blessing. You thought wrong. Sheldon walked away. That night, he burned every tape he had left. Not out of fear, out of control. Because the more he knew, the less real everything felt. His genius, his memories, his identity. What if it had all been designed? A week later, Sheldon sealed his encrypted discs in a shoebox, wrapped in lead foil, and buried it under the tree behind the church. He marked the location with an equation instead of a cross. He didn't speak of the tapes again. Not to Missy. Not to George. Not to Mary. He filed the memory away, like a corrupted program, unreadable, but impossible to delete. Years later, long after George Sr. passed, Sheldon would tell a version of his childhood to his Caltech students. A version with humor, with charm, but never with the tapes. Never with the truth. Because some genius isn't born. It's built. And sometimes, the blueprint is darker than anyone wants to admit.